From here to the stars. I am your host, Stephen Euin Cobb. Our guest today is Dr. Martina Mrongovius. She develops holographic media through research, art, and design. Her signature artworks are installations of spatially animated holographic images that capture psychophysical experiences of urban landscape. For 12 years, she was the creative director of the Center for Holographic Arts in New York, where she curated multiple exhibitions, including Interference, Coexistence, 2013, and Holographic Embodiment, 2019. Her collaborations include aquatic art adventures and holographic design for space exploration. She is currently producer of the Lake Arts Precinct in Macquarie, Australia. Doctor, in 2016, you co-authored, along with Daniel Blasco and Sarah J. Pasty, a book entitled The Floating World, Holograms by Rudie Berkhout, which is available on Amazon. Rudie Berkhout passed away in 2008, 8 years earlier, so he could not have actively participated in the writing. How did you get involved with that project? And more importantly, why was this topic important enough to you to contribute to a book about it?
Yeah, so I should probably start with my involvement came about in many directions, but I ended up actually living in Rudie Berkhout's house in upstate New York when I had just had a baby. So I had a under 1-year-old child and was really looking for somewhere to sort of hole up, do some research, and be with my family. And so I knew Rudie Berkhout as an artist, and I knew his partner and the people who were looking after his estate. And I heard through Linda Law, who was working up at his estate, that she was moving on. And so I knew that this house would be available. And my thought as an artist was this would be an amazing place that I could look after my family, and I would have access to a holography studio. Very naive as a young mother. I didn't make any holograms while I was there. But what I did end up doing was getting involved in an exhibition project at the Samuel Dorsky Museum of Art of Rudie's work, and really looking at those holograms. And this was Daniel Blasco, who was the curator, was very interested in Rudie Berkhout's transmission holograms. So these are holograms where the light is coming through the film. And if we looked at these holograms today, everyone would say, oh, they're a digital hologram. They were made digitally. But these are completely analog holograms, and they are made by they're holograms of holograms of holograms. So he is what we call a holographer's holographer, if you want me to repeat some more words. So he was really shaping light in these incredible ways. And so creating one hologram as, essentially as an optic. So making that as an optic to shape the light, to put into a hologram, to put into another hologram. And this was something that, for the art world, what he did was just a mystery. For a lot of holographers, what he did was almost magic. Like he was just so advanced and such a leader of the field. And how he made his holograms really was never documented in any of his art exhibitions. It was always sort of very much more on the aesthetic and the appeal and the content in them. And so for this exhibition, I mean, it's always hard after an artist has passed away, because sometimes artists choose not to really present their work, the technical sides of their work in their exhibitions. But he had written a paper in for an SPIE conference about his work. He had incredibly detailed documentation and lab notes of all of his processes. And so we consulted about this, that it was the time to talk about, really how Rudie made his holograms and why they're so special in this process that he's using to shape light. I mean, he created in a way that no one saw for another 15, 20 years digitally. And even now is just it's phenomenal what he created like virtual landscapes that you really you really couldn't tell how they're made unless you went digging into them. So that's how I got involved in the project. And as I started writing those essays, I mean, it was fascinating because one thing is I had access to all of his lab notes. I was in his house. I had access to all of his holograms, and I had access to all of his master holograms as well. So the hologram. So a hologram you see in an exhibition, there was often a master that made that hologram. In Rudie's case, there were often 5, 6 masters that came into making that one hologram. So I could get them and I could put them under laser light, and I could look into them in ways that you wouldn't be able to do when you're seeing art on the wall.
Do any of the museums you've worked at have examples of his holograms?
So most of his collection is actually held by his estate. The MIT Museum has a number of Rudie Berkhout's holograms. The ZKM in Germany has a number of Rudie Berkhout's holograms. I believe the Jonathan Ross collection would have some Rudie Berkhout holograms, and Linda Law with the HoloCenter in New York was just recently gifted one from Posey Jackson's collection. Mm-hmm. What was interesting is in the HoloCenter collection itself, we did have a series of holograms by Rudie Berkhout that he created with Anna Maria Nicholson. And these were an interesting one because I was actually before I was the creative director there, I was interning, and I was out the back and I found this box and it was labeled Holographic Collaboration. And I looked at it and I was like, these are incredible, Anna Maria. What is this? And she said, oh, this was a collaboration between Rudie and myself. And and she's like, oh, but they're rubbish, they're no good, And I pulled them out and I was like, these are extraordinary. So Anna Maria Nicholson created pulse portraiture. So that's where you get a human subject and it's a very fast flash of holographic light, of laser light. And so she was recording a lot of figures, figurative work, often double exposures, very sort of angelic and spiritual, really looking at the sort of, she just brought out incredible things of people. And then Rudie, on the other hand, has these sort of, he's creating landscapes in his sandbox table and these lines of light that extend out through space and very abstract. And so holographic collaborations, they got together and they used the pulse laser, but they actually put stencils on the laser light. So there were sort of these strips of light across human figures. And then they were overlaid and of different colors. Technically they weren't all perfect. It was very much a studio collaboration. But I said, we have to show this exhibition. And actually that's how I got to know Rudie. Rudie had just finished building his house in upstate New York. And he'd taken a break from holography and he was just starting to get back into it. And so this was his first show of getting back into it. So we showed the collaboration between him and Anna Maria Nicholson. And then we showed some of his holograms, his new work that he was creating by mixing liquids to get these light patterns. So again, just built a studio, built a house, built a studio, built a machine to make the holograms. And we exhibited them and everyone loved them. It was just spectacular. And in some ways, I hope I'm not getting ahead of myself by telling you all these bits of stories that are interconnected, but I'm a holographer and that's what I do. That's one of the first shows that I really sort of realized that I was curating. So I didn't mean to curate that show, and I was never, at the time, I wasn't told I was the curator. But afterwards I realized that I did all the curatorial work and then packaged it up and sold it and took it. It's now with the Jonathan Ross collection in the UK, which is fantastic. And so it was that realization, I love this. I love that process of working with these artists and helping them see something that in their work that they'd forgotten about, they didn't think was important, because for each of them it wasn't their primary their primary way of expressing their holograms. But together the results were extraordinary.
As part of the Alpha CubeSat project, a small, low-cost satellite, a CubeSat, is scheduled to be released into low Earth orbit in January 2024 and will deploy a Lightsail. This CubeSat and the Lightsail will be adorned with holographic art. My understanding is that you were a part of the creation of those holograms. If you would, tell me about that project and your involvement.
This is a fascinating project. And I have to say, it started before I got involved. So the artist C. Bangs was at an Interstellar conference with Robert Forward and Greg Matloff. And in the conversations, Robert Forward actually said, can we put holograms on interstellar probes? So this is, really following on from Pioneer and Voyager and the idea of putting a message plaque when we send probes out into interstellar space, which is beyond our solar system. And so this sparked C. Bangs to reach out to the HoloCenter and do an artist in residency where she created a number of holograms. I believe some of these are still up at NASA. And it was sort of the beginning of this dialogue about what other formats could we get these message plaques in. I mean, we all remember the Golden Record and a lot of the conversations about the Golden Record, how that was encoded, what images should be there. And the idea of the Golden Record compared to some of the Pioneer plaques was, more information. How do we represent Earth? And so this is one of the key sort of aspects about message plaques. The Planetary Society recently, I saw that they put up, if you contribute money to their probe, you get your name on a disc, like a disc that goes up into space. And so there's this real need with interstellar exploration that, we're probing and we're looking, but we're also sending a little bit of ourselves out there. And how do we do that? And so that's how I got involved with C. Bangs. And so the project had almost come through a whole cycle. This was started in 2001, but I really got involved, I think, in 2018 when C reached back out because I was then the director of the HoloCenter and was interested in creating smaller holograms for the CubeSat. So this is a project up at Cornell. Great team of students. And we looked at the different types of holograms that we could put on CubeSats. But then in the conversation, and as I'm a physicist, so as I was sort of like getting into this interstellar world, which I'd never really paid much attention to, and started to learn more and more about solar sailing. And this was just incredible. I started really thinking about how holograms are beam steerers, and particularly with Breakthrough Starshot. So this is all about sending these very small CubeSats out into space. And when you get down into that size and you start talking about laser beam propulsion, I mean, I'm immediately thinking of like, well, these are holographic sailcraft, people are worried about stability. And I'm like, well, it's optical. I know, we know how to use optical tweezers. We understand optical stability. You can levitate and move things around in a laser beam. That's what photonics does. And so really putting that thought process into the interstellar space, so going from that sort of that very small micro control into that big control was fascinating. I wasn't the first person to think about this. So when you start doing your research, you think you have a brilliant idea, and then you do your research and realize lots of people have had brilliant ideas. And so I found out John Caulfield, who's now passed away, he did some really interesting work about using sails with holographic reflectors on them, and they would keep as satellites to keep them in low Earth orbit. So essentially they're using sunlight to help stabilize their position by being able to how they deflect that light as they circle the Earth. Mm-hmm. There's also a lot of work talking about diffractive sails, diffractive light sails. And so this is a whole realm of work. But what I was seeing, other than John Caulfield, that most people who had looked into it were really coming at it from the interstellar space. They weren't really coming from the holography space. And so there was a lot of, I think there's a huge opportunity here of really connecting those two fields. And particularly in the way that there's a lot of developments in the holography space that I don't think the interstellar space know about, and there's a lot of developments in the interstellar space that holographers are just not aware of.
What is it about a hologram that it can allow it to help with stabilization? I also heard that it can be used for help with steering and also keeping the object in the beam, centered in the beam?
Yeah. So the first problem that was presented to me was the idea of these little tiny chipsats in a laser beam, and how do you keep them in the laser beam? And so, I mean, there's I mean, it's quite a geometric problem. So one thought is sort of Boolean forces. Well, if it was a ball, it might rotate, but it would stay in the laser beam. But do you want to create this reflective ball? I thought, create a reflective ball, put all your instruments inside, and off you go. That's one way of keeping it stable. Another one is you can shape your laser beam. So these lasers are going to be so powerful, they're likely not to be one laser, but an array of lasers. So by making your lasers sort of towards in circle patterns, and as you go further out, you just make them stronger, and that would keep something in the beam. It's kind of a bit like what we do with optical tweezing. You can create focus points, and then particles will sit at focus points. So then you could actively also use like a focus point propulsion, so that not only are you propelling it from just the reflection, but you're actually like scanning that focus point to help position. And that you could also steer very easily. And that's using the lasers. But you can also print onto the holograms. You can take a flat hologram and you can make it optically look like it's a ball to a certain degree, it's in about 180 degrees, so that the light's coming straight to it, but it's pushing it out a little bit. It's giving that little bit of stability where it's going to keep it in the beam. And how to then it gets into the really micro stuff of the beam correction. So I think the really key thing is, okay, you can create something that looks it's stable, but as soon as it loses stability, how does it recover? And making sure that that recovery is within your limits and what you want. And I think that's where a lot of research is going to happen, and it's going to be really interesting because we've never, with space exploration, you think about big rockets, you think about all this fuel, but these are incredibly lightweight instruments that we're talking about sending out. And we're probably not launching from Earth. It doesn't make any sense when you're dealing with this sort of lightweight stuff, there's no sense to launch it from Earth, particularly if your power supply needs to be a laser. So they're probably going to be launched from somewhere out in space. And it makes sense then also setting up things like relay stations. Using power, like harvesting power, having these sources so that you can correct and you can steer. You can also communicate, and that's the really interesting thing about this, is that you never really think about your propellant as a communication means, but as soon as you're sending these laser beams out to these holograms, if you've got any sorts of active beam steering on those holograms, you're also in the space where you're now starting to actually use this for data return. So rather than saying, well, this is our communication system and this is our propulsion system, you can start saying, well, actually our propulsion system and our communication system might be essentially coupled. And it doesn't have to be. Then I think you start to realize just how, when you take a surface and you start to put holograms on it, and then it's like, well, actually we could use this bit of the hologram for energy harvesting, and this bit of the hologram could be used for, and you start to actually think about the whole surface of your chip or your lightsail being able to have these different functions. And what we've seen in all of a lot of this is coming about through metamaterials and metasurfaces. Microelectronics have led the way, but then it's getting smaller and it's getting into the optical realm. And what you can pack in to a very small area is just I find it mind-boggling. You're looking at this diagram and you're thinking, okay, so this is energy harvesting and this is doing this, and then you realize that the thing that you're looking at is a few millimeters big. And so it's sort of these smart materials, when we're talking about going interstellar distances, this is that by getting them really down to this size, this is what allows us to get close to the speed of light. I think a quarter of the speed of light is the sort of the benchmark goal. to get to Alpha Centauri within a lifetime.
I mentioned that you are the producer of the Lake Arts Precinct in Australia. What are your main duties as producer of the Lake Arts Precinct?
So it's, not much interstellar work is happening. I do go sailing on the weekends. So I sit on my boat and I think about all those forces. And they always say that physicists make the best sailors, and I don't know why I keep coming last in my races, but
maybe you're doing too much thinking.
I'm doing well. I think I just like it out there. It's beautiful. So Lake Macquarie is a stunning. It's not actually a lake; it's a bay because it's connected to the ocean. But it's the largest saltwater lake in Australia, which is a bit of an oxymoron because that means it's not a lake. But that's okay. We can't upset the locals because it's just beautiful. And so the Lake Arts Precinct is a area where an art gallery, which I'm sitting in right now, and we also have a multi-arts pavilion, which is a 360 projections environment where we also do a lot of digital art, so VR, augmented reality, and then this whole space, it's in a park and it opens up so it turns into an outdoor stage. And it's got a catenary of programmable LED lights. So it's this really incredible, you're sitting at the northern tip of this beautiful lake, and then you've got this digital art space. And then wrapping around the lake, we've got bike paths and public art sculptures. And so at the moment, a lot of my work is looking at revitalizing a sculpture park. And this sculpture park leads from the art gallery down to the water. And I have probably spent more time thinking about concrete and than any other material in the last few months. So I'm learning about concrete. I'm learning about how we're also, the Newcastle area was known for its coal. So unfortunately, the side product of that is we've got a lot of coal ash, and we're now looking at ways of recycling that coal ash into concrete. So it's being an arts producer of a Lake Arts Precinct. So for me, I love it because it combines my love of the water, it combines my love of nature, it combines my love of art, and then I get to talk to engineers and scientists as well. And it's all about making projects happen. So that's my job. An artist comes to me with an idea, curators come to me with an idea, the community comes to me with ideas, or industry comes to me with ideas like, oh, we've got this new product, how can we use it? Do you know anyone who wants to try this? And then an artist is telling me, oh, I've got this idea, I'm not sure how to do it. And it's my job essentially. I feel like I'm like the telephone switchboard. I've got to have all these projects and ideas, like they just float around, and I'm just connecting them, constantly. And like, oh, if we put this person together with this project, and then we can exhibit it over in this thing and connect the pieces of the puzzle. And then that sounds simple. And then obviously the projects always stall, and you've got to be like, oh, this project is stalled. Why is it stalled? What do we need to do here? And get them going again. And so it's such a diverse job. It's probably quite hard to define exactly any particular activity.
What are some of the benefits and the challenges of using holograms in art? I mean, there must be difficulties of some sort with anything, I imagine.
Holograms are an incredibly difficult medium if you're going to be a holographer's holographer, in terms of often to create a body of work, I've built a studio or built a lab. It's if you're innovating in the space, it's in some ways it's difficult, but in some ways there's a lot of space because not so many people, it's not all been done before. There is actually a lot of space to move. But I think one of the big challenges for art holography is that you need to control your lighting when you're in the gallery. And this is why I got into curating, was I was just so frustrated with trying to exhibit and being like, no, I don't want your regular lights. I need to use a particular type of light. The light needs to be in this particular position. And sort of getting this blank look like, oh no, but we always use fluorescent lights in our galleries. And I'm like, no, you can't do that for a hologram. So really I worked with the Hologram Foundation for 2 years to create the exhibition Iridescence and support 11 artists make artwork. Part of that was that the hologram really needs to be exhibitable in a home. It needs to be sort of packaged as a product that you can take home. And that's incredibly difficult because, that means that you're not only making a hologram, but you're supplying a light and you're telling people where to put that light. And it's not, I think that's one of the huge challenges. What's really helped holography, though, is media art. And so, whereas when a lot of holographers were first exhibiting the idea of a dark space, well, why would you need the space to be dark? Isn't it a print? But now dark spaces are common. We're used to media galleries. We have people understand. We've got much more technically aware people in the arts because you've got video work, AV work, you say the word laser and people don't freak out anymore. They're like, oh, so what type of laser? Where do you need it? And they'll start actually having conversation with you about it. Whereas I think when holography started as an art form, it was almost never integrated with other art because the art world and the people creating the exhibitions just didn't know how to handle it at that point. And so what's really important for the evolution of holography is that it sits in multimedia exhibitions. It sits with other artworks. That when you say to a curator or an exhibition designer, this area needs to be dark, they actually take you seriously and they don't just like, oh, it's a little bit less light than everywhere else. They actually really allow you that darkness and they allow you to, and they follow your installation instructions. The number of times that someone hasn't followed installation instructions. I think that's one of the real challenges. Also the production time. So, an artist will sometimes reach out to me and say, oh, I've got a show next month and I'd really like to include a hologram. I'm like, no. Unless you have a studio built, running, designed, ready to go, where that process, the production time is slow. If you're really making art, and I mean like art where you're not just sort of putting some idea, with art, you don't just splash an idea out there. You're actually really listening and talking to the mediums that you work with. So if you're really using holography as art, you need to go into a studio and you need to see it and you need to interact with it. And pretty much 80, maybe 90, maybe 99% of the time, an artist who's never made a hologram before will have an idea, will make some holograms, and they'll realize that their idea needs to change. And that they've actually, it's a conversation with the medium, and it's like, oh, right, oh, yeah, okay. And then they'll actually, usually what they come back and do is 10 times better than what they started with, because they've really actually understood something about the holograms. It's not always the case. Sometimes you can just sort of say, okay, this is a great image or this is a great object. Sometimes people will make a sculpture and then make a hologram of it and it will work. But generally it's not extending the art. Why not just exhibit the sculpture in that sense? So
I wanted to ask, if you would put your physicist hat on, and if you can, describe, and it may be a very simple, maybe a very early holographic process, but describe the process of capturing on film, on photographic film, a hologram. What is the setup that's needed? Do you need a laser, 2 lasers, 15 lasers? Yep. What do you need?
I'll start with the simplest one.
Okay.
And I call this holographic photocopying as a sort of a joke, because it's so easy and we do it all the time, and compared to some of the more complex holograms. So I actually, when I'm teaching workshops, and I do this with kids from sort of 6 up, I did it with my son when he was 3. I actually use a photopolymer. So this is not, this is a material that you don't need to do any chemical processing to. So you expose it to the laser and then it's an instant material. Then you expose it to sunlight and that destroys the catalyst and you've made your hologram. So we've cut out all of that darkroom work. So I've simplified it just to what's happening on the table. So when you're making a hologram, if you're using most holograms that we make, what we use a continuous wave laser. So that's a laser beam. You turn it on, you see the laser beam's streaming out. And that's so that you've got enough light. So there's going to be an exposure time. You're going to have to illuminate your object. We're going to take an object. I don't know, we can take a seashell, per se. So we're taking our seashell and we're going to put it on our table. And this table, the main thing here is that this is vibration isolated. So we don't want things moving. Holography is great in the sciences because it's extreme precision. It means that when I want to kind of make my hologram on my seashell, I need to actually keep everything still to half a wavelength of light. Otherwise, I'm not going to record my hologram. So the simplest way of doing that is to get a box of sand. Use a sandbox. Sand is a great absorber of vibrations. So I'm going to take my sandbox, I'm going to put my seashell on my sandbox, and then I'm going to put my piece of photopolymer holographic instant film on top of my seashell. Then I'm going to shine my laser light. So when you think about a laser, you think about a sort of a line of light. I'm going to bounce my line of light off a concave mirror. And that way it's going to focus it down and spread it out. So I've got a nice spread out beam of light, maybe a shower of light, if you like. It's a nice beam of light and it's illuminating all of my seashell, all of my film. I've set it up. I open my shutter. I let that light hit my film. So the light is then, so you think about a laser light. This is a coherent wave. So that think about these wave fronts coming through that film. They go through the film. So you've got these waves in the film. You've probably got about 50 wave fronts as you go through that film. Maybe we're talking about 8 microns or so of actual emulsion. So it's about 50 wave fronts going through that. That light is then hitting my seashell. Those waves are getting shaped by my seashell and they're bouncing back through that film. And then I'm getting that interference pattern of inside that film. I'm getting that interference pattern of, okay, here it's really bright, here it's really dim. And that's what's recording inside that film. With the photopolymers, you can actually watch it happen, which is really fun. So one of the ways you watch it happen is, if you take a piece of glass and you shine light through it, the light comes through. When it starts to record itself as a hologram, it starts to reflect the light. So you start to see the shadow of the glass and it gets darker and darker and darker. You turn off the light because you made your hologram. And then if you're using this instant film, you take it outside into the sunlight, which is wonderful to do in Australia. Or if you're in Germany, you take it to your desk with your UV lights and put it on your desk with your UV lights because it's sometimes cloudy. Mm-hmm. And then what that does is it destroys the catalyst inside the photopolymer, and that means that the hologram is fixed. And these, to give you an idea of the stabilization, these are the sorts of holograms we're sending into space. And they've been tested in radiation environments, and we're pretty confident that they'll go into space and survive.
Okay. And if you look at the hologram that you've created with this process, what do you see? You see the shell?
You see your seashell.
You see the seashell from different angles as you rotate the film. Okay.
Yeah. So the bigger the film, so if I did a really small hologram, the film's like a window. So if it's a small hologram, it's a small window. And it's like I'm looking at that seashell through that window. If I took a bigger piece of film, I've got a bigger window to look at that seashell. So that the distance between your seashell and your film, how big that film is going to sort of tell you how much of around the seashell you can see.
Okay. My understanding is that one of the differences between a hologram and a photo is that if you cut a photograph in half, you now have half the photograph in 2 parts. But if you cut a hologram in half, you have the original image just from less viewing angles.
I'm so glad you said the second part of that sentence, the less viewing angles, because it's something that sometimes people leave out of that. They think that holograms are somehow magic and you cut it in half and it's like a self-replicating worm and it just sort of regrows. But that's exactly it. So because the hologram, the film itself is not the image, it's the window. So you're just breaking up that window. And that's also how I animate holograms. So if you think about that window and I had a seashell, I can actually tile different windows and then create an animation. So as you look through different windows of the hologram, you're actually seeing different images or different, like think about a stop motion animation film. So a lot of my early work was like creating stop motion animation, and you can take different moments of time through those different windows.
That was Dr. Martina Mrongovius. This has been From Here to the Stars, a video series created by the Interstellar Research Group. The IRG is a non-profit organization dedicated to thoroughly exploring the science and engineering that can eventually open up the reality of interstellar travel. Join us October 12 to 15, 2025 in Austin, Texas for the Interstellar Research Group's 9th Interstellar Symposium. Learn more at irg.space. I have been your host, Stephen Euin Cobb. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button, and you can subscribe to our channel for other such videos. On behalf of all of us here at the Interstellar Research Group, I thank you.